This is the fourth video in my series on the Latin subjunctive. In this one, I will talk about indirect commands. As ever, explaining Latin grammar with English examples is a very good place to start if a particular construction is to be made easier than it might otherwise be. Here then, in English, is an example of a direct command. Kill the prisoners, the king ordered his soldiers. This is called a direct command because the very words used by the king are quoted. Kill the prisoners, the king ordered his soldiers. Yes, that's a direct command because the very words used by the king are given in the sentence in quotation marks. Here is an indirect command, or here is the indirect version of the same command. The king ordered his soldiers to kill the prisoners. This is an indirect command because the words used by the king are not quoted, they are instead explained. Let's see how these two constructions are contrasted in Latin. Here is the direct command. Kill the prisoners, the king ordered his soldiers. In Latin, captivos caedite, rex militibus imperavit. It's the same as in English. The words of the king to his soldiers are directly given. Therefore, it's a direct command. Let's look at the indirect version of that command. In English, the king ordered his soldiers to kill the prisoners. And in Latin, rex militibus imperavit ut captivos caederent. It's the same. Not the direct words of the king, but an explanation of what the king said. But here we come back to the subjunctive. Notice how the verb in the order is given as a subjunctive. This is an imperfect subjunctive. You could translate it as the king gave an order to his soldiers so that they might kill the prisoners. It doesn't work in English, but that is a fairly literal rendition of the Latin. But just because it doesn't work in English says nothing about its success in Latin. So there you have it. Direct as opposed to indirect commands. In Latin, an indirect command will usually, not always, I'll come to that in a moment, but an indirect command will usually involve a subjunctive for the verb of what is commanded to be done. What happens if the order is not to do something? Here's the answer. Rex militibus persuasit, ne hostes timerent. The king persuaded his soldiers not to fear the enemy. For a negative, you put ne in place of ut. But notice, ne still goes with a subjunctive for the verb that is enjoined. A further point is that this indirect command construction does not need to be used solely for an actual command, an imperative. It can be used to describe a much gentler kind of command. Here's an example. Magister purus saepe monebat, ut bene laborarent. The teacher often advised the boys to work well. Is that an order? Could that be taken as a command? It is surely just a gentle exhortation. I said just now that a subjunctive construction is not always necessary. You use the subjunctive with certain verbs of command. Impero, I suppose, is the most common of them. But if you want to use eubeo, order, then you can use what we would regard as a much simpler and a much more natural infinitive construction. Look at this. Rex milites iussit captivos caedere. The king ordered his soldiers to kill the prisoners. Notice here not a subjunctive for the verb of what is commanded, instead just an infinitive, rather like in English. Rex milites iussit, captivos caedere. The king ordered his soldiers to kill the prisoners, not the king ordered his soldiers so that they might kill the prisoners. What is the difference between these two kinds of construction? Speaking as a foreigner, I find that rather hard to answer. They're both legitimate constructions. All I might say is that the first, the subjunctive construction, is rather more common. But why should it not be more common? This is Latin we're dealing with after all. Let's proceed to some examples to show these rules in use. Here's the first. Rex militibus persuasit, ne hostes timerent. The king persuaded his soldiers not to fear the enemy. Not an order in this one. Advice. But the difference between advice and an order, when it comes from the highest place, may not be that great. Magister purum monuit, ne hoc faceret. The teacher warned the boy not to do this. Another use of ne in place of ut to show that the command is negative. The command is not to do something. Or in this case, not a command, a warning. Gentle advice, let's call it. Rex mihi persuasit ut manerem. The king persuaded me to remain. Something else that you would not immediately class as a command, but it comes under the heading of an indirect command in Latin. Dominus servis imperavit ut cenam perarent. The master ordered his slaves to prepare dinner. That is much more what you would expect an indirect command to be. Notice the use of impero as a verb of command. I won't ask you to notice that impero takes a dative object, though it does. Notice also the use of ut to connect the two clauses, and of course the subjunctive verb in the second clause. Dominus servis imperavit ut cenam perarent. Then again, more helpful advice, masquerading as an indirect command. Magister puro saepe orabat ut bene laborarent. The teacher often begged the boys to work well. And lastly, here is another indirect command, or it's classified in Latin as an indirect command, though we would regard it as a request. But it tells you something of the elastic nature of this grammatical category. Puri magistrum hortabantur, ut verbis suis crederet. The boys urged the teacher to believe their words. Not a command, a request, or if not a request, an urging. Again, we might not in English regard that as an indirect command, but in Latin it does come under the heading of an indirect command. As ever, I will confess that there is more to indirect commands than I can fit onto a single slide, but again I'll assure you that this will do as an introduction to the subject of indirect commands. So once again, I'll thank you for having watched this video and hope that you will be able to watch the others that are yet to come. Thank you for watching.